Ukraine is stepping up in its battle for freedom from Russian aggression. There's already plenty of evidence of this. Long-range drone strikes are taking out Russia's air defenses. Ukraine fights valiantly on its own territory to slow down the advances of President Vladimir Putin's forces. Powered by rage, Ukraine will stop at nothing to defeat Russia. And now, it's just taken a massive step toward victory. Ukraine has become the first European country since the end of the Cold War to design and build a new ballistic missile. The Sapsan is about to hit Russia where it hurts. Ukraine's domestic missiles are a battlefield revolution for which Putin isn't prepared. According to the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine chose June 13 to announce that its short-range ballistic missile, named the Sapsan, was about to enter mass production. This was a clear message to Putin. For the entire war, Russia's leader has used terrifying missile and drone attacks to strike deep into Ukraine's territory. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, Russia has fired an average of 24.3 missiles and drones at Ukraine per day since the start of the war. And Ukraine has had enough. Now it's gearing up to reply in kind. With the Sapsan, Ukraine has developed a ballistic missile it can use to decimate Russian targets, ranging from airfields and ammunition depots to military bases and even Russia's aerial defenses. If Putin wants to engage in a missile battle, Kyiv's latest announcement means that it's ready to go toe-to-toe. Defense Express military expert Ivan Kirichevsky outlines what this really means for the future of the Ukraine war. The very emergence of domestic missiles is a bold political statement, a big fat middle finger to the Kremlin's claims that Ukraine must be demilitarized, he tells the Kyiv Independent. Just how big is that middle finger? To answer that, consider what the Sapsan brings to the table. The new voice of Ukraine provides some of the basic details. It says that the Sapsan has been in development for a long time, with Ukraine working on it since before June 2023. During that month, Ukraine claimed that the weapon was between 65 and 70% complete. Now it's 100% ready to be deployed against Russia. The Sapsan is a short-range ballistic missile that's completed combat testing and is now entering serial production, says the Kyiv Independent. Though it's not known how regularly Ukraine plans to use the Sapsan just yet, reports confirm that it's been deployed before. Back in May, Ukraine used the Sapsan to destroy a Russian military target at a range of 186 miles. That's according to Valentin Badrak, who serves as the director of Ukraine's Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies. Speaking to Liga.net, Badrak said, "Frankly speaking, success was preceded by the correct administration of this missile program. Since July 2024, a specialized Deputy Minister of Defense, Anatoly Klochko, has appeared, who became the coordinator of the program. The center of gravity has shifted from the Ministry of Strategic Industry to the Ministry of Defense, which is logical because it's the Ministry of Defense that is the customer of the missile and conducts all programs of specialized military technical cooperation." Badrak also told Liga.net that the Sapsan hits hard. He says that it's a large, powerful weapon that packs a 1,058-pound warhead. That's not too different from the UK-made Storm Shadow missiles Ukraine has in its arsenal, which Missile Threat says can come loaded with a warhead ranging from 881 to 1,234 pounds, depending on the version of the missile used. Resident fellow with the Transatlantic Defense and Security Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis, Federico Borsari, says that this warhead weight indicates exactly how Ukraine plans to use its new ballistic missile. "It's a very big warhead," Borsari tells the Kyiv Independent, which means that Ukraine is prioritizing strike power over range. That's an interesting snippet of analysis. Borsari suggests that the warhead size means the Sapsan will likely have a maximum range that doesn't exceed 310 miles. If that's the case, this indicates that Ukraine plans to use its new ballistic missile to strike behind the front line and into Russia's military rear. Crimea also becomes a target, as do Russian ships in the Black Sea. Perhaps Ukraine's plan is to decimate the air bases and logistical structures Russia has created that serve the troops Putin is pouring into Ukraine. Its full capabilities won't be clear until more confirmed uses of the Sapsan emerge. And beyond these basic details, not much else is known about the missile. That's likely by design. The news that Ukraine has a new ballistic missile, and one that it's producing itself, will already put Putin and his cronies on high alert. Ukraine doesn't want to give any more of the game away. By keeping the details about how the missile works a secret, it also mitigates Russia's ability to counter the Sapsan with its air defenses. That's smart. Russia won't find out precisely what the Sapsan can do until it's smashing down on some of its most important targets. So, it's known that Ukraine has a new domestically manufactured ballistic missile, and that it's on the verge of scaling up production. The question now is simple: why? After all, Ukraine already has long-range missiles it can use to strike targets deep in Russian territory. Beyond the previously mentioned Storm Shadow, Ukraine also has the US-made ATACMS. Plus, as German Chancellor Friedrich Merz announced on May 27, Ukraine no longer faces any restrictions on how it uses those Western-supplied missiles. That means it doesn't have to worry about political wrangling with the UK, US, France or Germany about how it uses the weapons those countries provide. But that isn't enough for Ukraine. One of the biggest issues it faces, and the first reason why it's built the Sapsan, is that Ukraine isn't certain how many more, if any, of these Western-made missiles it's going to receive. On June 11, the Kyiv Independent was among several outlets that reported on US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's decision to make a series of military cuts in the United States. At the time, no specific details were provided as to what Hegseth was planning to cut and why. But there are some hints. On May 5, Hegseth ordered the US military to get rid of 20% of its 4-star generals, along with ordering a cut of 10% of the US military's general and flag officers. Just a couple of months prior, Hegseth also signed a memo directing the US military to terminate $580 million in contracts, grants and programs, according to the US Department of Defense website. These earlier cuts show us that Hegseth is determined to make sweeping changes to how the US military spends its budget. Ukraine will naturally be asking the question, will military aid provided to Ukraine be next on the chopping block? The US has already provided $132 billion in aid to Ukraine, according to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Practically all of that money has been assigned, meaning there are no new aid packages on the horizon. That situation doesn't seem to likely change anytime soon, and that's a problem for Ukraine. As the Kyiv Independent reported on June 15, US weapons account for around 30% of the supplies Ukraine has received from its Western allies. Those supplies are dwindling, and if Hegseth is serious about making cuts, they likely won't be replenished. Borsari spoke to the Kyiv Independent about this issue, stating, "The president and the administration are interested in peace, which doesn't necessarily mean justice, however. This position obviously undermines Ukraine's negotiating capital while emboldening the Kremlin to continue with its military aggression without real consequences for now. It's the for now part that's especially worrying for Ukraine. Right now, uncertainty reigns when it comes to the level of military support Ukraine can expect from the US in the future. Will more ATACMS be coming? Perhaps not, and if that's the case, domestically produced missiles like the Sapsan may have the vital job of filling a big US-shaped hole in Ukraine's military supplies. As the US considers its next move, Euromaidan Press says that Europe is also trying to figure out what step up means when it comes to helping Ukraine fill that gap. For instance, European Union or EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the Rearm Europe plan back in March. Under that plan, the EU committed to dedicating around $920 billion to continent-wide defense, which included dedicated another $46.09 billion to Ukraine. However, that second proposal was blocked by several EU members, including Italy and Hungary, Euromaidan Press reports. So far, only $1.15 billion has reached Ukraine from the EU since von der Leyen's plan was announced, and that came from the interest generated from Russian assets frozen in EU banks. This isn't to say that Ukraine isn't receiving military aid from European countries, including those in the EU, but the amount of aid and what it includes is being determined on a country-by-country basis, which isn't ideal for Ukraine's war planning. As mentioned before, uncertainty about where aid is coming from is a major issue for Ukraine as it heads deeper into 2025. Sapsan is being introduced now as Ukraine tries to boost its domestic weapons manufacturing to make up for the potential loss of weapons, particularly long-range missiles like ATACMS and Storm Shadow, that may result from all of this political aid wrangling. And that leads to the second reason Ukraine is unleashing Sapsan. It needs to keep up its campaign of deep strikes into Russian territory. Those types of strikes have already proven massively effective as Ukraine tries to relieve the pressure Putin's forces place on the country. In December 2024, the Atlantic Council noted that Ukraine was doing everything that it could to expand its long-range arsenal to continue carrying out deep strikes. Its article came as Ukraine unveiled a new missile drone named Peklo, which the council says is capable of traveling at 434 miles per hour with a range that roughly matches that top speed. Even back then, the Atlantic Council reported that Ukraine's development of these types of weapon reflected its frustration with its Western partners and their delays. It also pointed out that many in Ukraine believe that securing a solid long-range arsenal is key to negotiating a fair peace with Russia. The idea is simple. Russia has leverage because it's able to strike Ukraine from afar. If Ukraine has the same ability, it can bring the war to Russia. Pressure is then placed on Putin. He starts losing key military sites, which affects how his troops operate in Ukraine. Plus, the more Ukraine can hit targets inside Russia, the more Russia's people start to realize the realities of the war Putin started. Long-range weapons represent leverage to Ukraine just as they do to Russia. And in March 2025, Sky News was reporting on what leverage really means. It shared comments made by Ukrainian Brigadier General Yuri Shchihol. He said that Ukraine was planning to intensify its deep strike campaign, which would involve doubling its rate of production on long-range drones to 2,000 per month. Russia is finding it increasingly difficult to conceal the extent of the damage, said Shchihol when speaking to Sky News. Headquarters have been hit, command structures weakened, and panic is spreading among their officers. Compared to a year ago, conducting full-scale combat operations has become significantly more challenging for the Russians. That's why Sapsan is so important. Ukraine needs to keep up the deep strike pressure on Russia. It can't do that with drones alone. Heavier hitters, such as missiles carrying warheads weighing over 1,000 pounds, are needed to drive home the point Ukraine is making to Russia. The message is clear. Ukraine can strike Russian territory just as hard as Russia strikes Ukraine. Plus, there are the comments made by Ivan Kirichevsky mentioned earlier in the video. He noted that Russia is pushing for the demilitarization of Ukraine and that the development of the Sapsan is a massive middle finger Ukraine is sending back in response. He's not wrong on either count. On June 19, the Russian news agency TASS reported on comments Putin made suggesting that he wants to see Ukraine completely demilitarized as part of any sort of peace deal Russia and Ukraine negotiate. We will not allow Ukraine to have the armed forces that pose a potential threat to the Russian Federation and its people. This isn't a new claim. Demilitarization was one of Putin's stated objectives when he began his supposed special military operation. The real reason Putin wants this, of course, is that a demilitarized Ukraine is a helpless Ukraine. It's not that Russia would have a neighbor about which it doesn't have to worry. Rather, Russia would use demilitarization to enable the takeover of Ukraine's territory. Ukraine isn't going to allow such a massive threat to its status as a sovereign nation. And now, for at least, the US isn't pushing to make demilitarization part of the peace deal it's trying to foster between Ukraine and Russia. Still, there's no denying what Putin really wants. With Sapsan, Ukraine is sending a clear message that Russia's leader isn't going to get the demilitarization he seeks. If anything, all he's done is reinvigorate Ukraine's domestic weapons production industry to the point where, despite having been at war for over 3 years, the country is producing more and stronger weapons than ever before. Sapsan is just one of many, but it's the weapon that may strike the most fear into Russia's collective heart. And Russia should be scared of Sapsan, for many reasons. The first of those reasons is something mentioned earlier in the video. The creation of Sapsan marks the first time a European nation has built a new ballistic missile since the end of the Cold War. That's according to Fabian Hoffmann of the University of Oslo, who confirms this information to the Kyiv Independent and points out that Ukraine is now definitely ahead of the rest of Europe when it comes to ballistic missile production. In fact, the only other European nation producing ballistic missiles, besides Russia, is France, and those are sea-launched intercontinental ballistic missiles intended for its nuclear warheads. The UK has ballistic missiles too, as do several other European countries, but none of those countries build their missiles themselves. Ukraine now does, and that opens up several possibilities, including Ukraine conducting direct strikes with its new Sapsan and potentially Ukraine selling that missile to its European allies to create an even greater long-term threat to Russia. The West knew Ukraine was working on this type of missile, Hoffman adds. Kirichevsky also points out that the arrival of Sapsan has come at just the right time. The Americans are running out of missiles, and they're not ready to give them to us. European partners have no ballistic missiles of their own. We'll have to make ballistic missiles because there's nowhere else to get them. Russia backed Ukraine into a corner, and it's come out swinging with a knockout blow directed at Putin's chin. There's also the problem of air defense, which brings us to another reason why Russia fears the Sapsan. Russia is huge. It covers around 6.6 million square miles of territory, making it impossible to defend the entire country with air defense systems. Of course, that isn't necessary. Russia dedicates these defenses to what it views as key military targets. But therein lies a problem. Russia's air defenses are weakening by the month. Already, limited resources are being stretched ultra thin. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says that Russia has already lost a massive 1,188 anti-aircraft warfare units as of June 20. Even back in September 2024, Business Insider was writing that Russia wasn't able to stop Ukraine from conducting deep strikes because of its looming air defense shortage. Yes, Russia's S-300 and S-400 systems are supposed to be capable of shooting down a ballistic missile, such as the Sapsan. However, Russia is in such short supply of both that it's pulling these types of systems from positions in Asia, replacing them with dummy versions in the process to cover more of its own territory. Ukraine has shown itself to be more than capable of taking out Russian air defenses, particularly using drone attacks. It's also tactically astute. Ukraine doesn't just fire missiles at a general target and hope to score a hit, as so often seen Russia does. It plans, it calculates, it uses drones and other weapons to create corridors of aerial safety along which more powerful weapons can travel. Then Ukraine strikes. That's likely what will become more common now that the Sapsan has entered the battlefield. In the coming months, precision strikes conducted using this missile will likely follow reports of Ukraine taking out air defenses in key locations hundreds of miles behind the Ukraine's war's front lines. With each of these operations, Russia's already weakening air defenses will be diminished, creating more opportunities for the Sapsan to cause real damage. And the worst of it for Russia is that the Sapsan is only one symptom of a much wider problem Putin now faces. Ukraine's domestic weapons industry is scaling up. As of April, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that more than 40% of the weapons Ukraine is using on the front lines are produced in Ukraine. That includes about 95% of the drones Ukraine uses to target Russian troops and equipment. Other missiles are also in production, including the previously mentioned missile drone and Ukraine's Neptune and Long Neptune missiles. What Ukraine has now is the manufacturing capacity to become one of Europe's leading weapons manufacturers. And it can only get bigger from here. On June 5th, Business Insider reported on comments made by Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries, Herman Smetanin. Earlier in 2025, he claimed, "The capabilities of the Ukrainian defense industry have grown 30 times over the 3 years of the invasion." That industry was worth $1 billion in 2022. Now it's at $35 billion and growing. The only problem Ukraine faces as it scales is that it's struggling to unleash the full potential of this blossoming industry. That's according to National Association of Ukrainian Defense Industry CEO Serhiy Goncharov, who tells Business Insider that Ukrainian defense companies are receiving contracts worth around $11.5 billion when they have the capacity to service contracts worth up to $45 billion. It's only budgetary limitations that are holding Ukraine back from producing more domestic weapons. That's a small mercy for Putin, as he faces up to the fact that the war he started is doing the exact opposite of what he intended. Demilitarization is off the table. Ukraine is more militarized than ever before. And with the emergence of Sapsan, its full rage is being unleashed in a weapon that has the potential to be a true domestically produced game changer in the Ukraine war. And all of this is happening as Ukraine continues to whittle away at Russia's air defenses. Just a few days ago, Ukraine's drones did the impossible and destroyed a supposedly unbreakable wall of these defenses on its own territory. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show if you want to see more videos covering Ukraine's latest innovations in its battle against Putin's forces.